For the 15 years I was married to him, I lived as a ghost in my own home. His parents, a formidable duo carved from disappointment and judgment, saw me not as a daughter-in-law, but as a curious and unwelcome smudge on the otherwise perfect portrait of their son. To them, he was a deity. He was the sun around which their entire universe revolved. His achievements were monumental, his minor successes were spoken of in hushed, reverent tones at family dinners, and his failures, had he ever been allowed to have any, would have surely been my fault. I was the shadow that proved how bright his light was. They never said it outright, of course. Their cruelty was a far more sophisticated vintage, aged in barrels of passive aggression and bottled with condescending smiles. It was in the way my mother-in-law would rearrange the throw pillows I had just placed, a silent testament to my inherent lack of taste. It was in the way my father-in-law would direct all his questions about finances or world events to his son, even if I was the one who had just read the article he was referring to. It was in the constant, loving anecdotes about his ex-girlfriends, women who were always, by implication, more suitable, more intelligent, more everything than I was. I was the woman who had somehow, through a stroke of baffling luck, trapped their magnificent son. My husband, bless his heart, was a man who craved peace above all else, and that peace was most easily purchased with my silence. He saw their behavior, of course. In the quiet of our bedroom, he would apologize for them, telling me they were from a different generation, that their love for him was just a little intense. He would hold me and tell me that I was the only one who mattered, that our life, the one we built within the walls of our beautiful home, was the only thing that was real. And I believed him because I loved him and because the alternative was to admit that I had married into a family that would never, ever see me as one of their own. The house was their favorite topic of conversation. It was a sprawling, beautiful colonial on a tree-lined street, a tangible symbol of their son's success. To them, every brick and every beam was a testament to his genius, his hard work, his superiority. They would walk through the rooms on their weekly Sunday visits, touching the countertops I had chosen, admiring the garden I spent every weekend tending, and they would praise him. "You've done so well for yourself, son," his father would boom, clapping him on the back, as if my husband had personally hammered every nail and laid every floorboard. They never acknowledged my contribution, my eye for design, my careful management of the household that made our life look so effortlessly perfect. I was merely the curator of their son's museum, and a poorly regarded one at that. His death was sudden, a thunderclap on a clear day, a heart attack at 42. The world simply stopped spinning. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it impossible to breathe. But my grief had to be small and quiet, because his parents' grief was a roaring, all-consuming inferno that demanded all the oxygen in the room. They became the chief mourners, the epicenter of the tragedy. Their son, their perfect, golden boy, had been stolen from them. At the funeral, they stood at the front, accepting condolences, while I stood to the side, a spectral widow, my own loss rendered secondary to theirs. People would murmur their sympathies to me, their eyes darting nervously towards his parents, as if afraid to be caught comforting the wrong person. The day after we buried him, they came to the house. It was the first time they had ever come without calling first. They didn't knock. His father used the key his son had given him years ago, a key I had repeatedly asked him to get back. They found me in the living room, surrounded by condolence cards and wilting flower arrangements, a ghost in a house that was already starting to feel cold and unfamiliar. They didn't offer comfort. They didn't ask how I was. His mother sat on the edge of my favorite armchair, refusing to lean back as if contact with the fabric might contaminate her. His father remained standing, his arms crossed, a posture of grim authority. He was the one who spoke. He told me that they had been thinking and that they knew what their son would have wanted. He said that this house, this monument to his life, needed to stay in the family. He said they understood I would need some time to make arrangements, but they expected me to be out by the end of the month. There was no discussion. It was a proclamation. My mother-in-law added, her voice a thin, reedy whisper of feigned concern, that it was for my own good. The house was too big for a single woman, the memories too painful. It was better to make a clean break, she said. Find a small apartment somewhere, something more manageable for me. They were evicting me from my home, from the life I had built, from the last tangible piece of the man I loved, and they were framing it as an act of kindness. I just stared at them, the silence in the room stretching into a thin, taut wire. I felt the grief in my chest curdle into something else, something cold and hard and heavy. I thought of my husband, of his desperate need for their approval, of the secrets we had kept locked away behind the perfect facade of our life. I looked at their faces, so certain of their rights, of their power, and I knew that the performance was over. They saw me as nothing, a footnote in their son's glorious story. They had absolutely no idea that I was the one who had written the entire book. I simply nodded. I told them I understood. I told them I would need some time. Their faces relaxed into matching masks of smug satisfaction. They had won. Their son's legacy was secure. As they left, my mother-in-law paused at the door. "We'll be sure to pack up his things for you," she said. "We know which things were truly important to him." The door clicked shut, and in the suffocating silence, a new kind of strength began to bloom in the wreckage of my heart. They thought they were taking their son's house. They were about to find out it was mine. The week that followed was a strange, hollow pantomime of capitulation. I bought boxes from the hardware store, letting them see me carry them in from the car. I started taking down pictures from the walls, wrapping them in newspaper and placing them carefully into the cardboard tombs. My in-laws would make unannounced welfare checks, their eyes scanning the rooms for signs of progress, their lips pressed into thin, approving lines. They saw my actions as acceptance of my defeat, the proper, meek response of a woman who knew her place. They had no inkling that my real work was happening late at night, long after they were asleep in their own beds, dreaming of how they would redecorate their son's house. In the quiet darkness of my husband's study, the room that his father had claimed as the very seat of his power, I wasn't packing. I was compiling. The secret we had kept for 15 years was not a simple one. It was a complex, carefully constructed reality built to protect a fragile man from the crushing weight of his parents' expectations. I had met my husband when we were both young and idealistic. He was charming, ambitious, and carried himself with an air of unshakable confidence that I found intoxicating. It was only a few months before our wedding that the first crack in the facade appeared. He confessed to me one night, his voice thick with shame, that his confidence was a performance. He had a mountain of debt from a failed tech startup, a venture he had hidden from his parents, who believed he was already a rising star in the corporate world. He was on the verge of bankruptcy, of a humiliation he was certain he would never recover from. I had a choice then. I could walk away from the man who had lied to me, or I could help him. I had just come into a substantial inheritance from my grandmother, a woman who had been a shrewd investor and had taught me the value of financial independence. I chose to help him. I loved him, and I saw the terrified boy behind the confident mask. But my help came with conditions born from my grandmother's pragmatism. I would pay off his debts. I would finance the down payment on the house he had promised his parents he was buying. I would subsidize our lifestyle, allowing him to use his own salary to slowly, secretly, pay me back without his parents ever knowing. But the house, the grand symbol of our future, would be in my name and my name alone. It was a non-negotiable term. He was so awash with relief that he would have agreed to anything. The deed was drawn up, signed, and filed. For 15 years, every mortgage payment, every property tax bill, every ridiculously expensive repair was paid from my accounts with my money. Our life was a carefully orchestrated play. His parents saw their successful son living in a magnificent house, providing a life for his dependent wife. The reality was that he was an actor, and I was the producer, the director, and the silent financier of the entire production. He was a good man, but he was a weak one, terrified of ever letting his parents see the real him, the man who struggled and sometimes failed. Our secret was his shield and my burden. Now, in the aftermath of his death, that burden was about to become my weapon. I pulled the documents from the fireproof safe hidden behind a false panel in the back of the closet, the safe he never knew existed. There was the original deed to the house, clear and indisputable, with my name as the sole owner. There were the bank statements from 15 years ago, showing the massive wire transfer from my inheritance account to the escrow company. There were 15 years of canceled checks and bank records, a meticulous, unbroken chain of evidence showing every single payment for the mortgage, insurance, taxes, and upkeep, all originating from my personal accounts. I printed out the records of his salary deposits and the corresponding transfers he made to me each month, the slow, steady repayment of his original debt. It was an irrefutable, ironclad story told in numbers and signatures. I called my lawyer, a woman as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass, and had her review every single page. She confirmed what I already knew: their claim to my house was not just baseless, it was laughable. She drafted a formal cease and desist letter along with a notice of trespassing to be delivered if they set foot on my property again after the designated date. The day they had given me as my deadline arrived, a cool, crisp autumn morning. I was expecting them. I didn't pack a final box. Instead, I set the coffee table in the living room. I placed a single, thick folder in the center of the polished wood. I made myself a cup of tea and I sat on the sofa, the same sofa where my mother-in-law had sat and passed judgment on me just a week before, and I waited. They arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, his father marching up the walkway with a real estate agent in tow, a portly man with a smarmy, predatory smile. His mother followed, a look of grim purpose on her face. They were here to supervise the final removal of the smudge. His father used his key again, a final act of presumptuous ownership. He strode into the foyer, his voice booming. Well, I hope you're all packed up. The agent needs to take some measurements. He stopped dead when he saw me, sitting calmly sipping my tea. He saw the empty walls, and for a moment he thought he had won. Good, he grunted. Glad to see you've been sensible about this. I didn't stand up, I just looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel the familiar pang of fear or the dull ache of resentment. I felt nothing but a cold, hard pity. There seems to be a misunderstanding, I said, my voice even and calm. I'm not going anywhere, but I do think we need to have a conversation. Please sit down. The real estate agent hovered awkwardly by the door. My father-in-law's face began to flush a deep, angry red. My mother-in-law's thin smile faltered. The power dynamic in the room was shifting, a subtle tectonic movement that they could feel but did not yet understand. This was no longer their son's house, it was my arena. My father-in-law scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. There is no misunderstanding. This is my son's house, the house he bought. We are his next of kin. We've spoken to our lawyer. It's a simple matter. He spoke with the unshakable certainty of a man who has never been told he is wrong. I simply gestured to the folder on the coffee table. Everything you believe is a lie, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. A lie that your son and I maintained for 15 years to protect you. My mother-in-law let out a small, offended gasp. The real estate agent began to back slowly towards the door, realizing he had walked into a family drama far beyond his commission rate. I opened the folder. I didn't rush. I took out the first document, the certified copy of the deed to the house, and slid it across the table towards him. Please look at the name on the deed of ownership, I said. He snatched it up, his eyes scanning the page with furious disbelief. I watched the moment the truth hit him. His face went from red to a blotchy, sickly white. His hands began to tremble. This is a forgery, he choked out, the words lacking any conviction. My son would never, his voice trailed off. He would never what? I asked, my voice still calm. He would never allow me to save him from financial ruin. He would never agree to let me buy this house with my own money after he confessed he was on the verge of bankruptcy. He would never agree to anything to avoid disappointing you. I didn't need to raise my voice. The documents did the screaming for me. One by one, I laid them out. The bank statements showing the 7-figure sum moving from my inheritance trust. The mortgage statements, every single one for 15 years, addressed to me and paid by me. I showed them the ledgers I had kept, tracking every penny your son had paid me back for his old debts, debts you never even knew he had. I stripped away their fantasy, layer by painful layer. Their son wasn't a real estate mogul. He was a man drowning in debt who was saved by the woman they had spent a decade and a half treating like an inconvenient piece of furniture. Their son didn't buy this house. He lived in it as my guest. My mother-in-law began to weep, not tears of grief for her son, but tears of rage and humiliation. You tricked him, she hissed, her face a crumpled mask of hatred. You trapped him with your money. You were a gold digger all along. We knew it. I looked at this woman, a woman whose approval I had once so desperately craved, and I felt the last vestiges of my deference to her turn to dust. No, I said, my voice hardening for the first time. You are the ones who trapped him. You built a pedestal so high he was terrified to ever come down. He lived every day of his life in fear of you finding out he wasn't the perfect God you pretended he was. He couldn't come to you with his failures, so he came to me. This entire life, this house, this illusion of success, it wasn't for him, and it certainly wasn't for me. It was all for you. It was a 15-year performance to protect your fragile egos from the reality that your son was human. That was the blow that finally broke them. The accusation that they were not the perfect parents, that their intense love had been a form of pressure, a cage, was a truth they could not withstand. My father-in-law slumped into a chair, his face ashen, looking like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. The fight was gone, replaced by a devastating, hollow understanding. They had been worshipping a false idol, and worse, they had been the ones who demanded its creation. I think it's time for you to leave, I said, my voice softening slightly. It wasn't a victory I savored, it was just a tragedy laid bare. This is my house, the locks will be changed this afternoon. Any further communication will have to go through my lawyer. The real estate agent had long since vanished. My father-in-law didn't seem to have the strength to stand. My mother-in-law, her face streaked with tears, pulled him to his feet. They stumbled out of the front door without another word, not like conquering heroes claiming their birthright, but like two frail old people who had just lost their son all over again, but this time they had lost the myth, which was clearly all that had ever mattered to them. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. It was finally, truly mine. The ghost was gone. In the quiet, I could finally begin to grieve the man I had loved, not the deity his parents had worshipped. I grieved his weakness, his fear, and the heavy secret we had carried together. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine. And in protecting his truth, I had finally, after all these years, reclaimed my own. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.